Ladies and gentlemen, just take your seats, please. Everybody has so much to discuss. Where are our singers? Can I have our singers up here for a moment, please? Ladies, where are you? Yes, please come up here. I need your attention. Up here, please. Up here for a moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I forgot to introduce the singers, if you can believe it. So please welcome Amma, Sarian, Hian, Tam, Valencia, and Leah. Come on, they're finally introduced. Standing ovation, we like that. Standing ovation, yes, we like that. Yay! I'm telling you, and at least one of them hates being on stage, so this is great. Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much. Now, we also have an important task for our fearless leader, Jürgen, to do, and that is to tell you about and to remind you about, speaking of communications, to remind you about that you actually have a communications unit.
Folks, can I communicate with you? Can you kindly sit down and we can get started with the next session? Super. You all remember that one of the sad pieces of news in the last few weeks was the departure of Sarwat, our communication specialist, who always, during these events, produced a PowerPoint. That was usually the most memorable of all PowerPoints of the session. So we'll see what those two are up to. But Sarwat it just sent me a message, and he says he wants to be with all of you, and he's really missing it. So shall I send him a message back that you gave him a round of applause? Yeah. This is great. He'll be thrilled. He will be really thrilled. And see, I will add a photo to this. Now, from now on, we have two communication specialists who will take our way forward. You know them both, at least many of you, some of you may not. One is Flor, who is actually replacing Sarwat. Flor and I worked together a number of years ago when the forestry team was in the anchor unit, when I was director of the anchor unit. Flora knows a lot about forestry, but she also knows a lot about agriculture, and she knows a lot about communications. So she understands what we're trying to achieve. She understands our issues, and she will be absolutely terrific, both externally and internally. So I'd like you to welcome Flora. And she's a resource for all of you and all of us. I want her to get to know every single one of you in this room, and those who are not here as well. And I want her to understand what it is you're doing and communicate about it every day in our newsletter, internally and also externally. And of course, you know Sia. Sia has been with us for a long time now as well. Sia is always quiet, but she does phenomenally good stuff. She's one of the producers, editors of these incredibly exciting short videos that you see from time to time. Usually she's behind the story. She'll come to my office and say, what do you think we should do? And I say, just go ahead and do it. And then she comes back with this absolutely fabulous stories that capture the kind of work that you do, both for an internal and an external audience. So I'm really thrilled that the two of them will take this forward. And I just wanted you to see them, welcome them, give them a round of applause, and talk to them. Communicate with your communication specialists. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good communication, by the way. Excellent. Right. We've got a panel, a final session on communication, and we've heard already today how important communication is. On almost every session, it's touched on that. We know how important those short, well-communicated pieces were. We know this is what really helps bring agriculture to decision makers. We know we need to be on top of it. So we've got some insiders and some outsiders here. I'm going to ask our insiders to stand up and self-introduce, starting with, don't say Uncle Dick. Mark Sadler, everybody, actually stand up. And Mark, do we need to? That's very polite applause.
That's fine. We did it yesterday.
Thank you. Ramesh, stand up and tell us who you are and where you're from.
Parmesh Shah. I'm the lead rural development specialist and currently trying to start a startup, which is the Global Solutions Group for Rural Livelihoods and Jobs. It feels like a startup.
Excellent. Holger, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Holger Krey, and I work with the Africa Agriculture Policy Unit.
Now, Mr. Dan Charles, who I will introduce. Dan, please stand up. He was, who said to me, I heard Dan on the radio today. He's from NPR. I don't think any of you need to know more than that, but he covers farming and the food industry. He's got a wide range of experience inside and outside, independent writer, radio producer. He's been on the NPR Science and National Desks, Weekend Edition. Lots of different interesting issues that you've covered. Author of 2 books. I love the name of this. Listen to this. Mastermind, The Rise and Fall of Fritz Haber, the Nobel laureate who launched the age of chemical warfare. Man, I want to read that. Secondly, Lords of the Harvest, Biotech, Big Money, and the Future of Food. And that's all about genetically engineered crops. So we're really delighted to have you here with us, Dan. And we'll be hearing from you in a moment. And I don't want to go into graduated magna cum laude because then it makes me think of my own academic career, but that's very well done at any rate, which wasn't that bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear some short interventions from each of our internal candidates. They've been challenged to do, again, some very quick 10-minute presentations. Then we're going to have an input from Dan, and then we're going to throw it open for the final session. So stay with us. I know many of you are jet lagged. Let's try and keep those devices down. Let's give them our full attention. Who's starting this darn thing? Pramesh, please, sir. Do you want to take it from here or over there?
I can do it from here.
All right. Are you ready? You've got, what did we say, 10 minutes? Or are you going to do it in 8?
I will do it in 8.
That's what I like. Go!
Thank you. I'm going to reproduce an Ignite talk which I did some time back with the SD management at a retreat. And it's a format which was different, in which the slides auto change after every 15 seconds. So it's something which you should get used to. We are not doing that version right now because it would be too complicated for Hyatt Regency to handle that. Okay, so this is basically, the format was that we were dealing with a non-agriculture audience, which doesn't know the intricacies of what agriculture is going through, and introducing an idea that agriculture and food is not a sunset industry, but it's a sunrise industry, and it could be a future job engine for youth. So I will go with the Ignite talk, and then you can ask me questions. So please don't be obsessed with only the content, but we also look at the communication, because it's a communication session, okay? So now this is something which was auto, and now it is under my control. So you can see this is what happens in actually situations. So what is happening? Okay. So basically, a lot of people consider agriculture as an informal sector. All the small and marginal farmers are entrepreneurs. We have almost like 500 million small farms. And all of them are entrepreneurs in their own way, but they are not necessarily big-time entrepreneurs. They come in all shapes and sizes. They are nano, they are micro, they are small, they are medium, they are large. And that's why this sector is very difficult to really create jobs, because 80% of the agriculture stays in the informal sector. Structural transformations taking place in agriculture. The conventional way of thinking is that's only cereals and it's only production. Actually, the more opportunities are now coming in vegetables, milk, fisheries, eggs. The kinds of non-cereal crops are more job producing and more job intensive than just the cereal crops. And I think this is what we see now in most countries. We have a tipping point. In 2025, in many countries, the non-cereal production will exceed the cereal production. And more jobs are going to come out of non-cereals. And unless and until we look at food differently, we will be looking at only a small subset of jobs which can be created out of agriculture. And food is not just production. I think we are stuck with all statistics which shows agriculture is just 10% of the jobs. I think it's a big myth which has been propagated by people who have not done statistics properly. In fact, processing, value chain, wholesaling, transport, logistics, and if you look at the numbers, I have done some calculations, the sector is about $4.8 trillion. And as a Ag GP, we have to lay claim to this $4.8 trillion rather than lay claim to just production of some crops and commodities. The faster in 2050, we should be known as Food and Agriculture GP, which is producing a wealth of $10 trillion. That's what we should be about. Now, we have a paradox. We have problems. It's going to not automatically being 10 trillion problems. We're dealing with farmers. Average age of farmers in Africa, 60. Someone talked, Isabella just talked that young guys don't have any land. The guys who have land are not sitting on innovations. And the guys who want to do innovations don't have land. We have paradox problem. But what is the demography? 364 million Africans between age of 15 and 35. If we are not going to start working with these people in preparing our programs from day one, we are not going to get to 10 trillion at all. So we have to change the way we do things in terms of bringing the young people in project preparation from day one. It's not only young people, it's young men and women. Women as well, because Africa, 50% of the production is done by women. 10 to 12 million new young workers seek employment every year. We have to interact with those people who are looking for employment opportunities. 60% of Africa's unemployed are young adults, and this population is growing. You have heard this again. So I think this youth demographics is a very important part of our future work. The faster we realize it, it's better for us. We can't keep on working with 60-year-old farmers all our life. There are new opportunities. Why do we consider agriculture as just production? Mechanization, entrepreneurship, technology. I consider urban agriculture as I think 2050, we will be creating more jobs out of urban agriculture. We will not be known as rural GP, but as an urban agriculture GP who will do food everywhere, whether it is in vertical farming, whether it's urban, whether it's rural, everywhere. Climate change, big opportunity. Energy, big opportunity. On-farm, we are obsessed with on-farm. Off-farm and non-farm will create more jobs. And faster we realize that off-farm and non-farm are more important, better for us. Enterprise intensity in agriculture and food systems is, you can see, 500 million farms, only 40 million SMEs. Our enterprise intensity in agriculture is just 8%. And that 8% is only one which is creating more than 5 jobs per entrepreneur. The rest is creating only 2.3 jobs per entrepreneur. Jobs are going to come from SMEs, and unless this 40 million becomes 100 million, you will not have more jobs. Each of our projects should have a strong incubation, startup, SME, youth component. If we do not do this, we are not job creators. We are just sustenance job creators. So we need to move away from this thinking about just relying on a very low level of base of farmers. Now, this is not new. Look at EU, 310,000 food companies, 4.8 million employees, 1 trillion for the EU 27, size of the economy. 99% of enterprise in food sector are small and medium size. You go to France, you go to Holland, you go everywhere, Germany. Jürgen mentions this example of a village in Germany which produces wine, which does tourism and all that. So agriculture is not about just producing something. It is about creating an ecosystem of jobs and employment around that. And that's the model we need to look at rather than be obsessed with just production and producing things all the time. Size of food sector in India. This is a very gross estimate. I think it's underestimated. It's $250 billion right now. If you come with a different definition of food. So I think advocacy terms, all our managers, all our task team leaders should know the new definition of food and should have estimation in their own context about what food means. And you should blog, you should tweet all the time the new number until this becomes reality. We have many examples. Kenya floriculture. This is an unbelievable example of where 507 million worth floriculture is exported. There are 2 planes from Nairobi which go to Amsterdam flower market every day. And they have created an ecosystem around floriculture. I think these are the clusters we need to develop. I think when we talk about jobs, jobs is a cluster concept. It's an economic concept. And unless and until we are thinking about 1,000 clusters of the kind we are talking about in Kenya, and you should realize that Ethiopia has already started working on this. They are at 230 million. So it is not that. We have 5 clusters in Africa now on rose and lot of other things which are almost reaching $1 billion. And awareness of our own GP on these clusters is very low. We need to know what are the 100 most promising opportunities. Yeah, I'm there. Uberization tractor, I'm not going to talk. We talked about, and the guys don't call it Uberization, but we call it, because we are marketing it that way. Yes, today, Jorgen talked about Hello Tractor, Hello Food. So in the famine situation, we will have people supplying food, and people want food. They will put an app, and they say, we need food. Others will say, we will give you food. And if we can reconfigure the whole famine into an app in which people who have food can supply people who don't need food, it will be a very interesting thing to do. Even if it fails, it's worth trying, because this is going to revolutionize the way the food distribution during the crisis is taken. So it's how do we take these innovations to the next stage? These are the new pathways to jobs. We have to create an enterprise ecosystem. We need aggregation, productive alliance. You are going to hear about this next week, and the skill incubation entrepreneurship. These are the 4 elements we need very strongly. Just to leave you with 2 visuals. Nature of future jobs, ICT. Each farm will be having a webcam by which it will be recording what is happening on how the farming is done, how the weeding side is done, whether pesticides are being used. We will have a RFID tracking on the trucks. We heard that from Hello Tractor guys, live streaming. You have Web3. Every farm will be web enabled. This is 2050. It's not a joke. This is futuristic. That's happening somewhere in the world right now. Second is the very important concept of farmer becoming a farmer, pharmaceutical farmer. It's producing a lot of enzymes, extracting enzymes from waste. This is not a pipe dream. There are a lot of enzymes being produced out of food. So the farmer is becoming a farmer and is producing a lot of enriched foods in the production. So agriculture has to acquire some characteristics of manufacturing to create jobs. Faster we realize that there will be industrial reorganization of agriculture in 2050, and agriculture, half of agriculture will be like manufacturing, and a lot of this production will happen. There will be customized ordering of crops, in which you will have to order crops through some kind of genetical modification, and you will prepare customized nutrition sensitive, iodine deficiency, fortified crops. All kinds of crops will be produced in factories all over the plants. I want to leave you with these thoughts and urge you to start thinking differently if we have to survive in 2050. We should be known as the GP which has created 10 million jobs in 2050. Thank you very much.
Now that's bringing it. That's bringing the energy, isn't it, folks? And the energy and the commitment and really giving us some good, powerful ideas. Mark. Mark's going to tell us now and show us an example of how to do a different type of communication to external audience. Over to you, Bwana.
Yeah, so the context, so I'm going to be talking to you about videos, and videos come in all different shapes and sizes. So let me tell you the context, watch the video, and then I'll tell you some of the Machiavellian thinking that goes on behind how you get one of these done. So the context is, we've already had an inflation in the number. So according to KPMG in 2014, the global food system was worth about $5.5 trillion. About $2 trillion of that was farmers, $3 trillion of that was agribusinesses and retailers, and about $500 billion was public money. We're after that $500 billion now. The big missing piece of all of this in managing risk and in managing emissions is that nearly all of that happens on the farmer's side of the farm gate. And at the $3 trillion, the agribusinesses and retailers were relatively, a matter of fact, almost totally disconnected from that and have not been engaged in it. And they do not see it as, quote unquote, their problem. But they are also a huge lever in making this happen. So what we needed to do, and what we're still doing, we haven't claimed victory yet, is to engage that part, that big part of the supply chain, and getting them to identify with the other side of the farm gate. We needed to get them at the table. So we were holding an event. We ended up with 100 or so companies crowded into a room in London for a day, and at 7 o'clock at night we actually had to call an end and get them out because they wouldn't stop talking, which was unusual. So let's watch the video. This was used as a flyer, and it's now being used, fun enough, by a lot of the companies. So if we could roll the video. That sounded professional, didn't it? And let's just watch it. Yeah.
Volatility driven by climate change is already impacting every level of the food system. It's increasing the spread of diseases like coffee rust, which in 2014 destroyed up to a third of farmers' coffee crops across Central America. In the same year, Cargill reported a 12% drop in profits as a 4-year drought devastated pastures in the US. And Unilever lost $415 million due to extreme weather events. When the retailer Asda analysed its fresh produce portfolio, it found that 95% is already at risk. These events reveal a pattern. The vast majority of impacts hit farmers and then reverberate along supply chains. In the medium term, climate change will continue to push up farmers' production costs. This will increase commodity prices and hit the profit margins of food companies as customers are unwilling to absorb higher prices. Companies across the food system will come under growing regulatory pressure to declare and manage their carbon emissions. Because unless food system emissions are reduced, they could reach up to 70% of global emissions required to remain within a 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise by 2050. But many will find themselves hampered by the fact that the majority of emissions are concentrated at the farmer level. In the longer term, climate change threatens to fundamentally disrupt the food system. It is set to wipe out entire growing regions, critically endangering the supply of important commodities, including coffee, cocoa, and even corn. By 2040, under business as usual, corn yields are set to decrease globally by almost 10%. But through effective adaptation, these losses could be limited to just 1%. The future stability of the entire food system hinges on farmers adapting to reduce the impacts of climate change. But it is not clear that farmers alone possess the finance, technology, and capacity needed. To increase the resilience of the food system, companies and farmers need to find new forms of collaboration. Be part of this dialogue. Join us to discover how farmers and food companies can build the resilient supply chains of the future.
So I'm not going to talk about that video. Isn't that annoying? But you saw the context and you saw the messages, and you may well draw away some of your own conclusions about what we were up to there. But I actually, unusually for me, anyone who knows me, wrote down some notes. So the reason was I wanted to actually be organized in thought. So the key, I think, and it applies to a lot of forms of communication, is to have a structure. So, or anyone in my teams is now, if they're groaning and they're on your table, you'll know who works with me. So 4 basic questions: why, who, how, and what, right? You have to answer those questions. So in the context of this, or in the context of videos, why? What is the specific objective of your communication? What are you trying to get over? What are you actually trying to do? You're trying to influence policy, you're trying to influence action, you're trying to influence money. There has to be a purpose, otherwise why are you communicating? So I came across this great thing just a couple of weeks ago, which is a new thing we introduced in team meetings called WAIT. WAIT actually stands for Why Am I Talking? It's interesting. It's a new behavioral thing that's out. But if you're not adding to the conversation, or if you're not adding something new, then why am I talking? Don't ask me about that now. Who? So the audience, who are you actually trying to reach? So in this context, it was very specific, right? We were trying to get to companies. We were trying to get beyond the corporate social responsibility. We were trying to get to CEOs. We were trying to get to the money that drives the decision making. So you will have noticed in those, in the various bits of that video, lots of dollar signs talking about losing money, profits, being in business later on. That speaks to business leaders That actually doesn't speak to corporate social responsibility people. We didn't do that. Go for them. They're not relevant to this conversation. They're terribly important, but they weren't relevant to the conversation. The how, that comes down to choice of format. In this situation, we're actually talking about videos. When it comes to videos, of course, it depends what message you're really trying to carry. So one of the really terribly successful video formats is testimonials. The testimonials are basically interviews with people. They're extremely powerful for connecting you to a situation and you to a message. So it really hits that piece of your brain that deals with emotions. And making an emotional attachment with a situation or with a problem can be absolutely critical. Obviously, this was for businessmen who have absolutely zero emotions, so we didn't use any testimonials. But we actually did take a series of interviews after the event and then sent that around. What was interesting there, of course, is the interviews were deliberately about money. So they weren't connecting with people, they were connecting with the title of the person in the company and what they were saying about money. That's actually been shared amongst a whole bunch of companies I know since then. Cartoons and documentaries can be terribly powerful. I certainly wasn't a fan in the very early days because I thought they may come over as childish. It turns out they're not, and that's because of how we see things and how we process things. And if you make a very simple cartoon out of it, it actually aids the brain to receive the message as opposed to look at the pretty picture. Bottom line is you receive 70% of information through your eyes. I'm talking to you at the moment, 7% of what you are actually being impacted is the words that I'm using. 70% is what you see. That's scary.
Yeah. But you're looking good, Mark. You're looking good.
We've got to get a new facilitator next year. So the what comes down to the messages and the fact. I get a green card for that. I'm sorry, that's the feedback.
That
Anyway,
was funny.
the what? Messages and facts, right? So we often, I used to suffer this horribly. We got to pack it with facts and statistics and get it out there. They are only relevant if they deliver your message. We over-factoid everything. It is not the point. It is about finding the fact or the two facts, not delivering 100. 100 is us trying to show that we did our job. People know we did our job, right? So, quick things on the videos. The advantage of the video, that 70% thing. It's very, very personal form of communication. Especially, so we use other tactics. So when we show the video, we actually black out all the light in the room. That makes you focus completely and utterly on that screen. And people do that in a very individual way. It actually, because it's black in the room, no one can see anyone else, it becomes a very personal experience. It really ups the ante quite a lot. The disadvantage of the videos is you actually cannot control the situation. So in this situation, we used it in a specific event. It was very powerful. It's been used a lot since then. You have no control over it anymore. So people can watch it, when we're doing all sorts of things. And most importantly, and this is also sounding terribly Machiavellian and I'm starting to be concerned, is that you create a situation for people to watch the video when you use them at events very deliberately. You can't control that when they watch it in a different situation. So if they're feeling sad or depressed, that video may not have the impact. In a controlled environment, you can ensure that they're happy or they're serious or whatever you need to have the video make its impact. Quick last two bits of advice, get a good team, right? I know that I don't know. That's the important thing. Split the artistic content and message functions. So when you do a video, get ready for tension. Because the person who's doing the graphics thinks that the graphics are the most important thing. The person who's doing the music is absolutely convinced that the music is what it is going to be all about. And the person who's trying to direct them thinks they've got a better idea, which sometimes it's turned out they have. But split up those functions, be ready for a lot of tension in the team. Your job is to manage it and lead it. It is not to be the artistic director. I know, because the first time we tried it, I did, and it was awful, actually. It was really awful. And the most important thing, and quite quickly, and the last point, is tell a story. Yeah. It's all about telling a story. The public debt of this country is a number. but it tells a story. It tells a story about all sorts of different things. So even if it's a fact that you're trying to get over in a video, you got to put it in a story. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. I thought actually for a moment there he was talking about parenting when you were describing working with those teams, but apparently not. Holger, 10 minutes. Give us your best. Can we all stand up for a moment? I just want to shake it out again. I'm sorry. At this time of day, stand up, everybody. Let's do it. Come on. It's annoying, but it actually will help our presenters. It'll help our presenters. I'm sorry to have to do this. It'll help me, at any rate. Oh, gee, okay. Everybody all with us? Last push. Apologies to the jet-lagged. Okay. Holger, give us 10 of your best. Go. Yeah, that sounded a bit off, didn't it? I have no idea what I was talking.
See, Christian and Paula and Juan, Marie and Hannah have something in common. Their stories have inspired change. Christian hands out the food to students in a school in Zambia's Kafue district. He's responsible for the school feeding program. But Christian is super concerned because he has nothing but maize to hand out for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. And despite him having buckets full of food, he sees the kids stunting in front of him. Paula is the head woman, the head man, of an indigenous tribe in the Atlantic rainforest of Paraguay. She sees her livelihood vanish by intrusion of the maize and of the soy fields. And the only asset that they really had in that community were wild orange trees. And her story has inspired a couple of industry leaders, and what I'm holding in my hand here is the first ever bottled bottle of petite grain oil from the trees of that community. This sells at $35 a pop. They are connected to a high-value market. I hand this around. It's a delicious taste. It makes you fall asleep.
All right. Sorry, that's not going anywhere, no.
Juan has inspired agriculture policy change in Uruguay, and whenever these technical stories don't work, I just tell a story about Hannah and Marie, who tend my beehives when I'm not at home, or who take care of the horses also. Why do I tell you? Because I really am deeply convinced that we need to spend much more time on establishing that common basis at the beginning of every conversation. See, that little chit-chat with a minister is not just some friendliness and you waiting to jump to your conclusion because you have this vision, you just attended that workshop, you know exactly what agriculture is going to be like in 2050, right? When we communicate, we spend 60% on average on listening. Doesn't apply to you right now, but on average, 60% is listening. But only 20% we remember or retain. That's my opportunity. I want the minister or my counterpart to remember a little bit more than she would usually remember. That's my competitive advantage, and that's how I induce change, and this is what this presentation is about. See, and then I've been in this event, and I've done all the chit-chat with the minister, and then I start communicating my vision, right? And then I've just violated one of the very important principles of how to induce change. John Cotter from Harvard has written the best paper, and it's basically mandatory for everybody who works with me to read John Cotter, Why Transformation Fails. Because in one of these 10 steps, a mistake has occurred. Do we really create that sense of urgency? I mean, see, there was, again, this roundtable discussion today with Jürgen on the famine, and one of the participants around the table said, this is too important of a crisis to waste it. Crisis is an opportunity, sense of urgency. Without a sense of urgency, there's no need to talk about policy reform or intrinsic change. Hans and I were around the table with a minister of agriculture, and when we tried to sell to her a functional review, she said, my institution is not ready for change. So we truncated that discussion. Create a coalition, understand first, and I'm not telling you anything new, you do this, but I want you to do it much more consciously. Use these stages. Create the coalition. Who are your allies in a ministry, in an administration, in a country, in our institution that can help you define your vision and then define it? Really have a vision, not just let the vision be agriculture shall be better, agriculture shall be more productive. A whole team here in the room has worked with the government of Rwanda on rewriting agricultural policy in the last couple of weeks. And that is where most of the time was spent. Then, if change efforts fail, it's because the vision is under-communicated at least by a factor of 10. Right? And because I don't have the time, I don't run you through all the stages in this process. But if you want to, I'll send you the Kotter memo, right? Because it's really super important. And it makes you more aware of these 3 very important stages of the process of inducing or guiding change, right? It's about guiding change. We are not the leaders of change. We at the World Bank, we guide change. Let me close my talk by talking to you about the tools that we use. So I talked about the enablers. I talked about the roadmap. Now about the tools. What are the tools that I personally use? We at the Africa Agriculture Policy Unit, we are a virtual team. So we need to use virtual tools. What you see here is a screenshot from my iPhone from yesterday afternoon. It's the Africa Ag Policy Unit cabinet. And that enables me in front of the minister, in front of each of you, and some of you will have seen me do it in our conversations just today or yesterday, not to tell you, oh, I'm going to send you that memo tonight when I get back to my hotel. I can send it right away. I can draw up a presentation right away. I can draw up a picture, and if it need be, of Hannah and Marie tending to the beehives, right? eba.worldbank.org. We have heard about the enabling business of agriculture exercise and how great it is. What I have missed is reference to the URL, eba.worldbank.org. Save it into your cell phones. This is fantastic. Like so many films, it's much better than the book, right? You can actually filter the data and display the data the moment you need it. And it's so convincing, even if displayed on a little cell phone, if you have the information right away. We use a lot of policy inventories, and many of you in the room have contributed to the series of policy inventories for the 48 African nations. And then this is my most powerful tool, right? That's my app. My app is actually the World Bank app. It can do incredible stuff. I've Uberized the way I work within the institution. I have this app, and I can put in Vikas, and then that app gives me a phone number, right? So I can actually call him, right? So I call him, and Vikas really gets me that information that I need right away. Isn't that amazing? We did this from Rwanda when we rewrote agricultural policy. And then there's Roy, he's my other app. And then there's Lorraine, my other app, and it's just a plea to actually leverage the knowledge that resides in all of us. I agree with our keynote speaker that it would be desirable to have another platform and another information. Let's see if we just leverage a little bit the information that's in the room and communicate a little more, then we're really a step ahead. Let's be knowledgeable. And if not us, who else? Thank you.
Thank you, Holger. Wow, that was great. That was very good. All right, so we've heard from the internal side and some really interesting challenges for us. Now, Mr. NPR, I've just decided to call you that, if you don't mind. Dan, guide us through from an external point of view. You've dealt with these stories. You've been in the food agriculture side of it. Give us some insights on some of your experience. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for letting me crash your party. And I realize I'm actually going to repeat some of the things that your internal experts said, which is interesting because I come from a very different world. Last week, I was over for dinner at some new friends, at the house of some new friends, people we hadn't really spent much time with before, my wife and I, in Charlottesville, Virginia. And we're getting to know each other, and the hostess said, "So what do you do at NPR?" And I said, "I write about food and farming." And she said, "Oh, food, that's interesting. Farming, not really." which encapsulates a little bit the opportunity and the problem that all of us face, me included. The problem has sort of several aspects to it. One is, in my experience, in most of the population, if you say agriculture, eyes glaze over. It's not something that people have a relationship to. My editor often tells me, when you go out to farm country and come back with a story, you have to treat it like you're reporting on a foreign country. You have to explain so much about what this place is and how it operates. So you have to take that on as a challenge. You are a foreign correspondent. People are not intrinsically interested in farming. I'm pretty convinced of that. But I think it is possible to still capture their interest in a farming story. There are a couple of other problems. One is, in my business at least, often the people who are interested are only listening to my stories in order to confirm their own preconceptions, which gets us to another thing that I'll sort of come back to later. And the third problem is simply attention spans, time and attention spans, particularly in my business. You know, I mean, the ideal length for a story these days is 2.5 minutes. You had 10. That's incredible. I never get 10 minutes on the air. I might get 3, I might get 4, sometimes I might get 7. But basically the challenge is people have busy lives, and every sentence I speak has to be kind of, the subtext has to be, listen to me, I have something interesting to tell you. So ultimately the challenge we all have is to reach across all those problems and communicate something that's actually worth knowing. I have a couple of extra problems in my medium, and that is, you just heard that 70% of what people perceive is visual. I work in an audio medium. All I have is my words and my voice to establish a connection and to keep people with me. So we have a few sort of strategies, and no one, I don't think, has ever fully tested them. So we basically, we have these ideas of what works. And so what I'm going to tell you today is a particular context. It's NPR, and it's also North America. And some of these may work or may not work wherever you are operating, but this is what I have because it's my life. And so I'm going to basically talk mostly about what I do, and at the end of my talk, we'll sort of think a little bit about what the areas of overlap might be in sort of what you do. I'm going to play sections of 3 stories and talk a little bit about each one, sort of like why I took the approach that I did. So we can start with the first one.
Order rice in a restaurant and the server may ask if you want white or brown. Here's another choice which could become available to people in some parts of the world. Yellow rice. Its promoters call it golden rice, and it's been genetically modified to contain beta-carotene. That's the source of vitamin A. Millions of people in Asia and Africa don't get enough vitamin A. So this rice tests a controversial idea that genetically engineered crops can improve the lives of the poor. NPR's Dan Charles reports.
There's a raging global debate over genetically modified crops, and golden rice is now caught up in it. But the story of this rice starts long before that debate ever got going. It started with a conversation in 1984.
This was really at the beginning of biotechnology.
Gary Tennyson was in charge of the Rockefeller Foundation's biotech program at the time. There were no genetically engineered crops yet. Scientists were just figuring out how to find genes and move them around. But the Rockefeller Foundation thought maybe these techniques could be used to give farmers in poor countries a bigger harvest. It set up a meeting at the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines to talk about it. But a lot of people at this meeting were skeptical. They were plant breeders, masters of the traditional way to improve crops.
And there was a group of those breeders that were sitting around at the guest house at the Erie, the Rice Research Institute, actually having a beer or two.
Tennyson joined them, and he said, okay, I know you all are skeptical, but what if this technology did work? What if you could really put any gene you wanted into rice? Which one would you pick?
What's your favorite gene?
They went around the room. Breeders talked about genes for resisting disease or surviving droughts. They came to a breeder named Peter Jennings, a kind of legendary figure in these circles. He'd created maybe the most famous variety of rice in history, IR8, which launched the so-called Green Revolution in Asia in the 1960s.
And he said yellow endosperm.
The endosperm of a grain of wheat or rice is the part you eat.
That kind of took everybody that was there a little bit by surprise. Certainly took me by surprise. And so I said, why?
Jennings explained that yellow signals the presence of beta-carotene, the source of vitamin A. There are yellow kinds of
You can
corn
take it out
or
now.
sorghum.
So, how would you start a talk about golden rice? Logical thing, right? Describe what it is, describe what it's good for, have some numbers in there, numbers of people, suffering from vitamin A deficiency. Talk about some of the, arguments for it, arguments against it. It's a policy discussion, right? So what I tried to do in this story, and it goes on for a while, and we bring in other characters. We bring in an activist in China who helped, basically agitate against a study that was done in China on the nutritional benefits of vitamin A, and got the author of the study sort of censured by her institution. Talked to people in the Philippines, talked to Gerard Barry, who's former Monsanto, now Erie, people involved in the story, people who are sort of playing central roles in the story. Okay? So this is the dogma. This is the dogma at NPR. If you're trying to sort of explain something like this, you embed it in a story with people who are doing something. Think of a story as something like you sit down at a bar or sit down somewhere with somebody and say, you know what? You know what happened? Right? That's the way human beings communicate, typically, through stories. Like, this happened to me. I heard this happen to somebody else. Somebody did something, right? That's the essence of a story. It can be a little bit more complicated of a story is, like, we have this problem, and this is how we try to solve it, and this is what happened. The archetypal story. I go on a voyage, right? Ulysses, right? Or stranger comes to town. Archetypal stories that are like instinctual almost in human beings. So I tried to tell the story of golden rice through starting at the beginning. So just don't present the argument for golden rice. Tell the story of Gary Tennyson hearing about it for the first time from Peter Jennings, and Peter Jennings saying yellow endosperm. Like yellow endosperm? What's that? And the story starts. Okay. Okay, so there's a danger in this. What do scientists always say you got to avoid? Anecdotal evidence. Right? So obviously you have to pick your stories, because there are stories that can tell you falsehood as well as stories that tell you truth. And so that's where all sort of the background research comes in. But ultimately you want to try to tell a story. That's what we think. That's what we think works. Hopefully it does work. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say about that first story. Well, let's go ahead with the second one.
When I was a kid, apples were garbage. They were called Red Delicious, and they were red. They were not delicious. They looked beautiful, but then you bite into it, and almost always it would be mushy and mealy, just nasty.
It was a really bad time to be an apple eater. It was also a really bad time to be an apple grower.
Everybody, really, just about literally everybody was growing Red Delicious.
This is Dennis Courtier. He's the owner of Pepin Heights Orchard in Lake City, Minnesota.
We were going broke. We were being asked to deliver goods for below the cost of production.
If Courtier tried to raise his prices, some other farmer who was growing the exact same Red Delicious apples would say to buyers, hey, I'll sell them to you for less. Because Red Delicious apples were this ubiquitous, interchangeable thing. They were a commodity. And making commodities, whether it's cheap socks or metal screws or Red Delicious apples, is a terrible business to be in. Hello and welcome to Planet Money. I'm Jacob Goldstein.
I'm Dan Charles. I cover food and farming for NPR. Today on the show, how we got from mealy, nasty apples to apples that you actually want to eat, apples that taste delicious.
Yeah, there was a guy who discovered a delicious miracle apple, but discovering that apple was not enough.
Yeah, that's enough of that one.
Nice.
So this is actually a story about intellectual property, believe it or not. It's about a shift that happened in the apple industry from commodity apples to branded apples, or what the industry calls club apples. About a particular variety of apple called Honeycrisp that many of us know and love, and how it sort of woke people in the apple industry to the fact that people actually cared about what variety an apple was, and that if they controlled that variety and brought it to market, they could earn more money that way. And it sort of unleashed this wave of innovation of breeding and marketing in the apple industry, so that now you go to the store and you see all this stuff. The point of this story is simply, where did we start? We started with the apple, because that's what people experience. Remember my host saying, food's interesting. Agriculture? Not so much. But if you start with food that people experience directly, you have sort of an entree. You have a connection. You have a common experience, and then you can sort of walk backward and say, you know what's behind that food? There's this field, and it's got this issue, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's the other thing that is part of our dogma. Make a connection to people's direct experience. Make a connection to the food that they eat, because that's a very powerful connection. Third story requires a little bit of introduction. There's this thing that I've always sort of felt like it's pretty important, and I probably ought to do a story about it, called cover crops. But like, how do you get people interested in cover crops? Right? Not easy. But then something happened that kind of gave me a window or an opportunity, and that is, a couple of years ago, there was the city of Des Moines, the water utility in the city of Des Moines, filed suit against some upstream counties saying, you got to control the nitrate pollution from your fields that is going into the river, which is our drinking supply. Filed the lawsuit. I did a story. I sort of described the origins of nitrate pollution in that story. And I got an angry email from a listener, which precipitated, I said, oh, okay, now I can do this story that I've been thinking about. So we can play the start of this third story.
You know, a few weeks ago, we told you about a conflict between the city of Des Moines, Iowa, and farmers who live nearby. The Des Moines Water Works says it will go to court to stop farmers from releasing so much nitrate pollution into the rivers that supply the city with its drinking water. We're going to dig a little deeper into this because Dan Charles, the reporter on that story, got some very interesting feedback from a listener.
Sarah Carlson was driving to work in Ames, Iowa, when she heard me talking about nitrates in the water.
And I was like, oh, I really hope he nails this.
Because this topic is Carlson's specialty. She works with a group called Practical Farmers of Iowa. They try to farm in ways that protect the environment. As Carlson listened to the radio, she was thinking, I hope he doesn't say that nitrate just comes from farmers using too much nitrogen fertilizer.
Or at least doesn't say fertilizer only.
Well, here's what she heard. Farmers spread nitrogen fertilizer on their cornfields. It turns into nitrate, and then it often runs into streams through...
And then when you said, I was like, oh no.
Carlson was frustrated because she hears that all the time from journalists, politicians, also
that's
farmers.
Enough of that.
And
from there, I go into a description of, like, so why is it that nitrate flows into the river? What she was telling me is, it's not too much fertilizer. It's the fact that there's only a crop growing there for 4 months of the year. As we have to have stuff growing there, you know, most of the year. And that's the issue. And so cover crops is the answer. The point is, with her, remember, you know, the first point I said, you need a character, you need people in your story. Finally, I had a real person. Finally, I had conflict. Finally, I had a story. And, you know, afterwards, it's really funny. Some people congratulated me on my humility for allowing criticism of me on the air. No. I mean, it was totally selfish on my part. When I interviewed her then, I wanted her to actually be more vociferously angry at me because that makes a better story, right? Because That's what you need if you want to turn a dry topic into some sort of story. Now, briefly, how does that overlap with what you do? I don't know. I mean, does it at all? Sometimes you have to make yourself the central character in the story, I think. You know, because the story is like, I've been trying to do this thing, whatever it is, and we have this problem, and this is my experience with it, or it's somebody you meet. But, you know, sometimes you have to kind of like create a story. Just before I leave you, just one other thing. I have a friend who, by the way, do you hear echoes from what you heard from the previous speakers? The story, right? Also, the other one very huge limitation I have is I just talk over the radio. I have no connection to people. They hear my voice, they can tune me out. If what I say corresponds to their prejudices, they hear me. If it does not correspond to their prejudices, they don't hear me. The only thing that overcomes that kind of communication gap, I think, is relationships, which is kind of what Holger was talking about. And you actually have the opportunity to take advantage of that. Relationships of trust are the only way that actually I think true communication happens, but that gets very philosophical. I have a friend who does a lot of talking with scientists about communication within the field. He thinks that biomedicine, which is his area, basically researchers don't even understand each other when they give presentations. So he has a whole sort of laundry list of ways to improve that kind of communication. And some of it overlaps. One of it is figure out what your central point is and just focus on that. Sort of tell a narrative that sort of holds together. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time to sort of create a story that actually communicates, that gets through sort of the haze and the short attention span and the like people looking at their phones. If you want to sort of really sort of capture people's attention, you have to work at it. And that means rehearsing presentations, not recycling them. Figuring out, the central thing is figuring out who your audience is and what they might be interested in hearing. That's like, once you've like figured out that, you're halfway there. But it is really, really important. I guess that's my final thought.